Hello,
Hello.
everybody. Hello. Happy Friday. We have a wonderful guest joining us today, who is Kristine Kern. Kristine is a co-founder of Realize, and an executive coach with over 15 years of experience. And Kristine knows a lot about great teams. So, very exciting guest, very exciting subject. Welcome, Kristine, and what's on your mind?
Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me. I'm excited to speak with you for this next bit of time. What's on my mind is kind of what's usually on my mind during the week, which is thinking about the teams that I've worked with this month and those that I have coming up, and kind of what their common struggles are, what makes them effective, and then where they have trouble. So this past month, I dealt with 2 new teams and then a team I've worked with for a long, long time. And it's always an interesting perspective to think about what's coming up for leaders and what's kind of an ongoing problem. So I'll see if that raises any questions for you guys first before I start talking.
Actually, one thing I'm wondering is, are you going to analyze how the three of us operate as a team while we go through the episode?
Yeah, so good question. Are you a team? I mean, so that's an interesting question.
Oh, yeah, we are a team.
Okay.
Well, I'm interested to understand now that you've asked that question. How do you define what makes a team a team?
Yeah. So usually a team, there's a couple of really important criteria. The first one would be that you would have a shared kind of vision or mission. So probably you guys have that.
That might exclude us because I don't know if we know why we're doing
Well, right. So then you would be like a lot of teams where you're actually a team, but you haven't done the work of being a team. So like a shared mission is a marker. And then very pragmatically, a shared goal. So like, what's the proximate work product that we're going to put out? And then there's kind of a lot of other scaffolding, I would say, that if you do the work around will help you be more high performing. And one of the things I think I find is that because we grew up thinking and talking about teams, right?
Right.
Kind of sports teams at school, all kinds of teaming. And then once we get into work, we kind of assume we know how to team.
Yeah.
And we forget that there was actually a lot that went into making a team really. So there's a lot of practice on teams in athletic situations. If you're, in a theater group, if you're in a musical group, again, there's so much practice that goes in to the performance. And that's the piece that kind of at a super high level, you want people to understand about being a team. It's like, doesn't happen on its own. You have more productivity if you actually spend time on being a team.
That's a really interesting point to me, because I just remembering a job, my sort of first job where I advanced, sort of into the management level. And instead of getting any training, I was kind of thrown into my first external facing meeting with not even a practice session, nothing. I got negative feedback from the person, on the other side. And that kind of had a damaging effect on my entire career at that company. Was kind of like remembered. It's really interesting that you say like there's all this practice in the teams, and there I was kind of like being penalized for not having the skills before I should have had the skills.
So yeah, what you're bringing up is one thing I see often, which is that how teams start is really, really important. And so like actually spending the time when you have a new team. And frankly, this is another thing that kind of blows people's mind. When you change out even one member of a team, you need to recalibrate that, right? And so like executive teams, I mean, very rarely do I deal with an executive team that has constant membership over long periods of time. And so, Eric, even if you were just the only newcomer on that team, there's great value in level setting in what's the purpose, how do we act, what's our proximate goal. Like those 3 are just basics that if we don't have that, back to the question here, are we a team or not?
Yeah,
Or
so
are we a working group, right? So a working group is just an assortment of people put together trying to get something done, but they don't have any of the real kind of foundations you need, I would say.
it's really fascinating that you brought this up. I was in a conversation earlier this week with some folks that I do leadership workshops with, and we're talking about doing some new workshops in the new year. And we were talking about situational leadership and the situational leadership model. And then one of the people on the call made the same point that you did, which is, it's not just like you have to lead the right way for the person that you are leading and where they are, and also not just that you as a learner need to understand where you are. Do you know, not what do you know that, or not know that you don't know, or whatever it is, all those things. But also that she made the same point of, when you have a team, even one new person on the team essentially moves the whole team back into that. I think in the situational leadership model, they call that D1, right? Like that sort of like, I am now in the, we don't know what we don't know, because we don't know how to work together with this new person, and whether they know we're going to make, if we're not careful, we will make assumptions that this new person understands all the things that the old person
Right.
understood, and they don't. They absolutely won't. That's a really interesting perspective, and I think really important.
Yeah.
It's
So
so interesting, Kristine, because in reality, what happens is the old person is out, the new person is thrown in, and everybody just proceeds like nothing happened. And it's upon that new person to figure out, how do you fit, what do you do? And hardly ever, as a matter of fact, I cannot think of a case where the team would look at that and say, okay, well, let us help you on board. This is how we do things. Would that work? Would you level with them?
Yeah, so that's kind of so 2 big points I would have people take away from this, which is, one, teams require an investment. And there's actually an ROI on that investment, which is, if you have aligned and you have a purpose and a goal and some behaviors or norms that you've agreed on, you then have a playbook for the team. And when one person leaves and the other person comes on, you go back to the playbook. You don't have to reset it all. You just have to bring them on board. And so it's kind of, there's always a value. When I meet a new CEO, one of their questions is always like, well, I'm not sure my team is final, which I always kind of thought bubble, whose team's ever final? But but it's a good question. If you're making a hire, the question is like, well, when do we get the team together? I always am like, well, we can wait if you have somebody, who's onboarding soon, but just know that doing this work will allow you to onboard those people more effectively and efficiently. And that's a big deal.
So one thing so I was having coffee with a former colleague, and he wasn't particularly happy with some of the stuff that was going on at work. And he was talking about the fact that somebody had come in, he had been changed his role, or was changing his role. Someone was coming in to take his role. And this person came in with a typical kind of, or not, I should say, not atypical approach, which is come in guns blazing, insult the old team for all the I was hired because you guys screwed up kind of approach to things. And I'm just wondering, like, so there's how do you set up the team for success, but how can individuals set up themselves for success in a team, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think the rate of change and a team's ability to assimilate that change is hard when there's a change at the leadership level, right? Because, I mean, if I believe that changing out one member of a team changes a team, you can imagine what I believe when you have a leader change. It's literally an entirely new team. So in that case, it sounds like you're describing a new leader coming in. That's like, that leader should be starting at ground zero and bringing everybody along. So like, inherent in being a good team is that we have an alignment around what mountain we're trying to climb So what we're
Mhm.
doing, the strategy, and how we're going to get there. And sometimes, and then like, in addition, the behaviors that we're going to use. And any of those things can be a mismatch. And so like for this new leader coming in, those would be the things you want to make sure we're all in agreement on. And frankly, I think one of the harder things, particularly when you don't do the work, is if that's not clear, having people understand that they are not really a good fit any longer for that team. And so the work I do is, generally called like organizational health, or, healthy teams. I want it to be exceedingly clear whether or not you are a fit on a team. And the only way that's possible is if the team has gotten together and had some agreements and alignment around that. And to me, it's a great thing when you can, then it's like a model of attraction, because like, yeah, I want to work that way. And it's super clear that's how they're working. Or repulsion, like, yeah, I don't want to do that. They have a strategy I don't think works at all. Let me get out of here. So then it's a choice. The problem is most teams don't do that. So like your friend, it all changed, but it's not clear. It's not transparent. He's guessing. Maybe it's the right thing. Maybe it's not. Then everybody's unsettled, right? And think about what that does to productivity. So that's kind of where it gets even more interesting.
So there's a leader that I really admired at one company that I worked at, where he came in and his team would talk about the fact that when he came in, he sat with every person on his team. He probably had a team of 30, 40 people, every person for an hour, and just had them walk through, what do you do? Just so he could understand. And so I tried to replicate that in the next company I went to, and I think it worked well, but I ended up having a lot of the conversations that you're talking about, people who were frustrated. The team was in a situation where they were very frustrated with the way things had been. They wanted things to change. And I actually said to them, I'm like, listen, I really want you on this team and I want to work with you to make things better, but it is going to take some work. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like that you are up for that work, that's okay. And I will happily help you find another role, find another job, and so forth. Because I agree with you. It's like at some point you've got to get the team out of. I feel like teams with new leaders that don't do this work that you're talking about, there's a lot of sabotage that happens.
Yeah. Because, it was like, well, I was hired on under this circumstance and now it's this other thing over here, right? And if you don't have some transition across there, it's very hard to keep that as an expectation. Jeff, you brought up something that the team person in me can't let go. I would not consider 30 people a team. That would be a department to me.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So like, just because I think a big point about teams too, and what I see a lot of is teams that are way too large. So particularly I like kind of young growth companies, and, there's a lot of competition for talent. Everybody wants to report to the highest level person that they can, right? So there can be bloat on teams. I ask leaders to look at it the other way, which is that if you're a leader, each person on your team is kind of exponentially increasing the tax on you as a leader. In addition to the communication stuff, right? So all a team is a collection of relationships. The more people you have, the more relationships you have to have working at a really high level, right? So in my ideal world, leaders are very, very kind of, I would say, parsimonious with how they enlarge their teams. 8 is a great size team. 10, I'm okay with. I have worked with 15. What it is your meetings have to get that much longer in order to actually have what a true team needs in order to function properly. So it's just about time, which you guys talk to leaders all the time. Time is the thing that everybody's like, I don't have time. Right. So it's like, okay, you don't have time. You want to be really efficient. Build as many small teams as you can and put in place the communication practices that are going to help everybody understand what's going on. That is a much more efficient way to run. So I have strong feelings about team size.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm sure we could talk to that point in a much longer conversation. Feelings about that, but one of the things that you brought up that is, my focus right now is I talk about middle management. And the big trends that you hear about in the news about middle management is you'll see articles about the great unbossing, or they're getting rid of middle folks, and this view that having middle leaders is just a waste of time, and that everything would be so much better if the junior people just reported directly into the senior people. And I have very strong opinions about that, but I would love to hear your reaction as you're talking about this to that middle role, given what you just said about having smaller teams being really effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think inherently you're going to have middle because, I mean, unless a team is, at most 20 people, which what a company is maybe 20 people for not very long, our hope, right? Yeah, so the middle is hugely important, and it is the messy middle for sure, right? Like they're not leading, so they're not setting strategy. They're really the kind of execution layer, but they're the execution layer and the key communication layer up and down. And that's the piece that I think, getting people to understand how important that is, I think is also hard. One of the things I do at the end of kind of each leadership team meeting I have is we do cascading communications, and you're giving the team the opportunity to tell positive messages. And I don't mean positive in like it's all good news, but you've framed the message in a way that is aligned with, what everybody believes and they need the people to know. I have teams who, even after doing work with me, will take a pass. Oh, well, there's nothing really we need to communicate. And I'm like, okay, you're telling me that the executive team just got together for a full day and there's nothing you need to tell the rest of the organization. What's the matter with this picture? But there's an interesting thing about like what the pressure of communication is. Most leaders I know under communicate rather than over communicate. And that's like a big risk for organizations.
So I have a different direction I want to take. Do you have? I mean, I'm sure you see innovative and learn about and work with innovative approaches to sort of team building. So what are you seeing? Like, what are the innovations? Whether they're popular or you've seen only work with, like, what kinds of innovations work and in team building?
It's interesting. So I have done this work for, as I said, a long time. I did it before COVID. So I did it all in person. During COVID, I probably for a good 2 years did it virtually only. And now I can do it hybrid. I almost always will do it in person. And the reason for that is that the kind of the relational aspect to teams is so much quicker when you're in person. There was, I think McKinsey just did another study on the kind of in teams working together, not working together, and they came out with like 50% for maximum efficiency, 50% of the time your people should be co-located or working together. That's high, but I would take it. I have so many teams who are virtual. That seems to be the way forward. So then really you have to make a commitment to get that team together in person to do some of the stuff that it's really hard to do in these boxes on a screen kind of way. Eric, I hate to disappoint you. I actually don't think there's a lot of innovation on teams because what we're talking about are relationships. I think the innovation I see is around asynchronous communication. I think there's a lot of innovation there and teams using async. It kind of used to be a bad word when I first started, like, what? In a document you're communicating? Like, very different. Now it's like best practice. Teams actually do a pre-read doc and they, have comments in it. And so that makes takes great advantage of async and different time zones and all of that stuff. So that would be, I would think of innovation.
Yeah.
But the relationship piece is like literally nuts and bolts. Like I can't give you anything that I would say that is like a newfound way. I just read, HBR just did a big series on the state of team. And of course I was like eating it up, looking for what might be different. I mean, it's literally the same stuff that I've been working with for all. There's some different ways to talk about it, you know, like the goal and the relationship and the communication style, but it's all the stuff that we really have known to be true. So it's a good question, but I don't have a sexy answer.
That's okay. That's good to know. Jeff.
Oops, you're on mute.
I rarely do that, but there is a bird like right out my window, and it is chirping. Like, I don't know if y'all can hear that, but anyway. So I thought I would jump in with some questions from ChatGPT. So
great.
We warned you.
Yeah.
The fourth member of our team is ChatGPT.
So my question for you before I ask ChatGPT's question is, would you like absurd or thought-provoking first?
Oh, let's do absurd.
All right. Absurd, well, sometimes it does better job than others, but how about for absurd, it says, if leadership styles were characters in a reality TV show, who would be the villain and why?
Leadership styles, who would be the villain? Characters in reality. So wait, I have to know a reality TV show character? That's like that.
Absurd.
Any villain would do, Kristine.
What?
I said any villain would do. That's not from reality.
We can leave the reality. I think ChatGPT seems a little confused today.
Right.
ChatGPT is not aligned with the team goals right now.
There we go. Yeah. I mean, what would I say is like a villain on a team? I mean, I hate political behavior, right? And so I have a simple definition of politics on teams, which is you change what you say based on who's in the room. So the biggest villain I would be the person who, when I'm here with my team, say you guys are my team, I say, oh, I love this work and what we're doing together, and I can't wait to do it with you all. And then I leave, and the first thing I do is talk to my friend in the hallway about how that's the stupidest goal and why are we even doing that, right? So that disingenuous thing, it's usually not quite that blatant that it happens. The way I just gave you the example, it could be like, well, I have doubts about it, and I meet somebody, or we have a meeting right after this, and then I'm just venting about it or talking it out. But that actually has a real kind of pull down effect on a team that people need to be really conscious about. I was with the team this week and I was like, I'm fine if you need to process things, process them with your dog on your walk or with your partner. Don't process on the team, because you're definitely impacting how other people receive those people or that information. So that's the villain, is the political one, which is ironic given where we are today.
So we're going to pick somebody from the House of Cards, I gather. There was tons of those, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's my thought-provoking question for you. Maybe this, I don't know which one was absurd and which was thought-provoking, but we'll go with it. It was, have you ever met someone who was too motivated? How do you handle a leader with infinite energy? I thought an interesting question.
Oh, interesting. I don't.
I always know I hit the mark with provoking when people go, "Oh, I got to think about that for a second."
Yeah, right. Has anybody been? I mean, I don't know that I've met one of the positive indicators that you can make a difference on your team is the leader is really invested in it. So from a team perspective, I would say I can't imagine an situation where a leader is overly motivated on team. Usually they're undermotivated on team and they want to kind of, get somebody else to really do the hard work of it. So I would say I can't imagine a situation where a leader it's a bad thing that somebody's too motivated. Most teams are starving for attention and care. So it's really the opposite problem, I would say.
Do you think, and we actually got a question from the audience today, which is unusual, but before I go to that question, my question for you is, do you think, though, that a leader can be too like overly energetic, meaning like they're too they're so energetic that they kind of suck all the air out of the room, I guess is kind of the thing that I'm.
Well, for sure, there's so many things about being a leader, and we could do a whole session on just the leader, like the profile that you have. I mean, not uncommon for people to not be able to speak up when you have a leader who over talks, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think listening is one of the underrated skills for great leaders. So if we want to equate it with that, I still go back to like anybody who's super, super invested. I can work with that. Give me that, because I can target them on where that energy should go. I would say that would be better to me than somebody who's like, well, do I have to do this work or something, like that.
So we did get a question from Dr. Kim Allen, who is a friend of ours and has been on the guest, and we are huge Dr. Kim fans. But she asked the question, what happens when the leader is the one bringing up the politics and doesn't read the room? So interested in your reaction.
So I don't know if that means bringing them up like they're the political one.
I'm assuming that's what you said.
That's how I'm thinking.
Yeah. And this is why I think Elena mentioned, I coach leaders and I also coach teams. I love to do it together because then we have all these levers. So to me, one of the great things about working with a team is that if it's the leader, you have all these different levers to show that leader that they're the one. Right. And by that, I mean, you have all these different people on the team who, if we're doing our jobs well and they can actually speak into the situation. And, like when I do an initial session with the team, at the end, we do live feedback. And so if you're a leader and you hear from 2 or 3 people on your team, well, I'm not always sure that you're telling it to us straight here, or whatever ways they're going to say that. The repetition of that by members of their team is really, really powerful. So I think it's bad news if it's the leader, because they're going to have a huge impact. It's good news if you're working with them on a team, because you can probably get to a space where a couple people might mention it. And then that leader might hear it. Lots of ifs in that situation.
I think what you're talking about is something that I've been talking a lot about recently, which is this idea of you have to get everybody in a learning mindset, and the leader has to be open to feedback, and these things aren't working, because if they're not, then really what you have is I call it marionetting. I don't know if anybody else uses that term, but like the leader just doing stuff through others is not that I don't know if that's a form of a working group, to use your terminology, or if that's, but I would definitely say it's not really a team if it's just the leader just making people do stuff.
Well, I also think that certain degree of vulnerability needs to be permitted and welcomed and normed, so to speak, on the team, both from the leader and from the members, in order to resolve that or make any positive progress. And I'm interested to see what you think about it, Kristine.
Yeah, so I often use Pat Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. When I first meet a team, that's the first team model. And the bottom of that pyramid is trust, and it is vulnerability-based trust for exactly that reason. So if I am working with a leader, it's one of my criteria. I pretty much won't work with a team where the leader's not able to say, yeah, I own some of this, or yeah, here's what I don't do well. Great leaders are all about that. And the thing that happens when you lead with vulnerability is it's reciprocated. I've literally never seen it not reciprocated. It may not be reciprocated to the same degree, but it will be reciprocated, because you're basically putting out a welcome mat for it. And it's very rare that a person will turn their back on you. Most leaders that are not vulnerable don't have an experience with that. But if you can start to get them to do it, they'll be like, oh yeah, well, that changed the conversation when I came to it with like, hey, I'm not really understanding what you're trying to get at here, rather than like, you can't, that doesn't make any sense at all. Right? Like, which one of those would you respond to? The first one, I put it on me. The second one, it's on you. So which one of those is actually going to engender a positive conversation?
So okay, so you brought up a couple things. You brought up put this question into my mind of, I wonder if Kristine can walk into a room meeting a team for the first time and be like, yep, this team has potential, or this team is a disaster. Like, are you now experienced enough to be like, oh boy, this one's gonna be a disaster, or this is gonna work out great? Can you kind of tell the difference in 5 minutes of?
Oh, 5 minutes? No, not 5 minutes.
Well,
I can tell the difference if I work with one of the things often at the end of a full day is I'll talk with the leader about what I see on the team. Like, where do I see concerns? Some of it's personality, some of it's role, some of it's how they show up, some of it's about the leader, that person themselves. I always say, invite me to your meeting and I'll tell you a lot, because how teams meet is how they act. Right? The playground of teams is meetings. So like what happens in a meeting will tell you, is there a free flow of information? Is the leader making space for others? Are people being, kind of aggressive and trying to get their point across, but respectful, right? So like all of these things are indicators for how teams are operating. And absolutely, not only me, I would submit that anybody, if you're walking into a meeting and trying to understand, if you look for like, does this seem high functioning or not, you could probably tell. Most people don't walk into the room that way, but I bet we could all tell. Yeah.
So I have a question for you that will be very helpful for me in the work that I've been doing, which is when you come across, so I've come across situations in the last year where I will be brought in by somebody in more senior layer saying essentially my junior folks aren't, doing all the things they should be doing or whatever it is. And I think it's almost fair to say that it's impossible for that to be as one-sided as that. It has to be.
I would agree.
Or whatever. But the interesting question I have is, how do you have that conversation with the person who's sort of like, the problem is they are pointing the fingers outward and they're not seeing, it's not to say there aren't problems with those other folks. Yes, but where's there's this idea of contribution versus blame, right? Like I could blame the team for it, but what's my contribution to the situation? And how do you go about getting people to see that they are playing a role in the team functionality, as opposed to sort of looking at going, oh, my team isn't really doing what they need to do?
Is that leader talking about the team he's leading, or is he talking about the department in general?
Probably department in general.
Mm-hmm. So then I kind of walk through like, what does a team model look like in an org? And having done this work for so long, I have some credibility, right? So I can usually say okay, here's what a team does. Here's the functions of a team. Here's what a healthy team looks like. And I'll always say when I'm talking to leadership teams, I have never met a situation where I go in lower and the teams down here are healthier than the team at the top. Those behaviors trickle down. Full stop. End of questions. So it's like, okay, so let's look at what's not. If you're going to argue to me that team at the top is great, which first of all, I'm going to ask proof of that. So, we'll use an assessment, we'll do interview, whatever. Like, we want to prove that your team is as high functioning as you believe it is. If that is true, which 98% of the time it's not, then it's like, okay, so where's the gap? So that means you don't have a situation set up where they're cascading those behaviors or that strategy down. So there's some sort of problem in the translation. And so let's look to that. But I will tell you, most of the time, it's the team on the top hasn't done what we talked about at the start, identified what their purpose is, identify what their strategy is, identify what their goal is, identify what their norms are, and shared those and aligned on those.
Yeah, you brought up 5 dysfunctions of a team, and the thing that I always remember from that book is the part where essentially it's like, which team are you? What's your team? What team are you on? This is your team, not we all have go off in our silos and we have these departments or whatever. We are a team, and how do we function as a group? Well, Eric, I think we're probably.
You're gonna do it. Are you gonna jump in and say we?
Jump in and let you do the thing, because that's your job on the team. So
that's right. It's my job, and don't take it away from. No, just kidding. So we, as always, and as promised, Kristine, it flies by. And before we say goodbye, we always go around and ask everybody to provide one piece of insight or one last thought. And what I don't tell people, and if you watch our episodes before, I guess you know the secret, but I always make the guest go first because that way you don't get any time to think. But hopefully it's balanced by the fact that it's the topic you are very comfortable talking about. So we'll start with you, Kristine. What's one thing you want to leave the audience with?
Be intentional about building teams.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Before I jump into my one thing, Kristine, what is the best way for people to reach you if they want to work with you or talk to you or hear more about what you do?
Yeah, so my email is the easiest way to get me. Love to hear from anybody I love talking about teams. As you said, I could talk about this for a really long time. It's a great pleasure to me to help others. It seems difficult. It's not. It just takes some work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's Kristine with a K at wearerealize.com for anybody who is listening on the podcast platform as opposed to seeing our screen. Okay, Jeff.
Awesome. Well, I love your point about being intentional about building teams. And I think really for me, it's this idea that everybody has to be in this mode of we are a team that is constantly growing, improving, learning, and getting in that. You talk about being vulnerable, the leader being vulnerable, but that whole idea of how do you create a team culture in which people are vulnerable because that's how they will get better and learn. So that was my takeaway, and I will pass it to Elena.
Yeah, so to me, one of the big ahas is that when we join a team, it's not only what we do together, but also how we do it. And if we spend more time thinking how the leadership level does it, it also cascades down. And therefore, that much more responsibility lies on our shoulders to do it right. And we all under index on that question. How do we do it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so my one thing is going to focus on the point you made, I think in response to ChatGPT's question about villains, which was politics is the killer. It sounds like it's the number one killer of team dynamics, based on what I heard. And what was interesting is I remember when I started in a startup many years ago, there was this kind of notion like, we don't even have any politics. We're so amazing and whatever. And I'm like, in my mind, I was probably doing something that you would not have been happy with, which is right. You don't have politics. There are all kinds of politics here. I just wasn't saying it. So anyway, that's my takeaway. Kristine, this has been a great conversation. I'm definitely going to be thinking about this topic for the next few days, if not for the rest of from here on out. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Kristine.